This evening, early voting begins this week. We hear from advocates of two propositions on the ballot that, if passed, could have a profound impact in the Arizona democracy and representation. First, Prop 140, aiming to open Arizona's primary elections. And then, Prop 134, seeking to change the signature requirements for creating a proposition in the first place. This is Before You Vote. Welcome. I'm Mike Broomhead. We are 1 month away from the election, and in that time, we will continue to cover as many issues, candidates, and propositions on the ballot as we can. Before we sit down with today's guest, I want to start off with the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance last Tuesday. Now, many expected this to be kind of a flame-throwing insult fest, and it turned out to be a reasonable, measured debate by both candidates. I think, in my opinion, J.D. Vance did what he needed to do in this by introducing himself to America outside of the way he's been portrayed in the media. If that was the goal from the Trump campaign, I think they get an A. Equally, I think that Tim Walz was measured. It was nice to see both candidates compliment each other and say there are some issues that we agree on. And they also spent most of the night, instead of defending themselves, defending the top of the ticket and their running mates. I think that was a win for both as well. The vice presidential debate reminded many people, and I've heard it from many people, that we wish top of the ticket would do exactly the same thing. Now stay with us. It's a look at the Proposition 140 with Chuck Coughlin, a member of the organization leading the campaign. Should the state have open primaries? He tells us why he believes Arizona should vote yes in November. We'll be back in 60 seconds. All right, continuing our conversations about propositions and what you'll be able to vote on. It's the Make Arizona Elections Fair Act, and the treasurer, so you're in this capacity, Chuck Coughlin. You've been wearing so many different hats, but I want to talk about this because I know this means a great deal to you. Prop 140. It
does.
So let's talk about what it would accomplish if it's passed.
Yes.
So a yes vote means what?
It creates an open primary in Arizona. Today, what we have is a closed primary system where only Republicans can run on one ballot and only Democrats can run on the other ballot. And voters, if you're a Republican, you get a Republican ballot. If you're a Democrat, you get a Democratic ballot. If you're an independent, you have to choose one of those ballots. So they force you to vote on it. And then more importantly, as an independent, you can't run in a taxpayer-funded election. So we're going to treat every voter the same, every candidate the same, that uses taxpayer money to run an election. Everybody gets treated the same. That's why we call it the Make Elections Fair Act.
So the only question, I have a bunch of questions for you to clarify for voters, is that an independent candidate right now isn't on either primary ballot.
No, they have to collect 6 times as many signatures. So Kirsten Sinema, for example, would have had to collect 40,000 signatures to be on the general election ballot, while her Democratic opponent and her Republican opponent only need about 5,600 signatures to be on that ballot. It's just fundamentally unfair because you're using taxpayer money to fund an election, so treat everybody the same. That's the call to action.
And it doesn't hide party affiliation. It's going to, it would then, you would know who the Republican candidates are, who the Democrat candidates, and who the independents and Green Party and Libertarian would all be there.
Correct. So let's open up the hood. Why do that? Other than it's fair, why do that? What most people don't understand is 80% of anybody that's running for Congress or for a state legislator, anybody that's elected at a district level, 80% of those candidates, 8 out of every 10, are elected outright in a primary. And you'll say, no, they have a general election opponent. But 80% of those districts are either safe Democrat or safe Republican. So today's system, you're a Democrat, you win in a Democratic district, you're Yasemin Ansari, you win with less than 30% of the vote. You don't need to participate in the general election, you're done. And so what we want is a system where everybody has to compete, where the free enterprise system forces competition, forces ideas, forces better choices, forces better candidates by creating more competition. In our system, what we are doing away with, nobody will be able to win a race outright anymore in the primary. You will be guaranteed a competitive election in this system.
The two criticisms. One is this is only going to help so few candidates, that the majority of candidates are Republican, Democrat, that there's so few independents. Does that wash with you?
No, it doesn't, because you're breaking down the barriers. So today, you could come and say to me, Chuck, I want to run in a Republican primary. And I'd say, Mike, do you believe the election was stolen? Do you believe abortion is illegal? Do you believe? I could ask you 3 or 4 questions, and I could tell right away with the electorate, because only 20% of Republicans turn out in the electorate. If you don't answer all 3 of those questions right, you're done. You can't. So in this environment, what I'm saying is that candidate is going to have to campaign in front of everybody. You're going to have to talk to the entire electorate who can vote now in your election. There's no prohibition. So it changes the mindset of the candidate to have to go compete in front of all the voters in your district. Not the majority. I mean, it'll be a majority. If it's a Republican-leaning district, I'm going to talk to Republicans. But I got to talk to I got to talk to independents too, and I may have to talk to some Democrats as well. So instead of just, Paul Johnson says this best when he ran for mayor, and remember, this is the way we run every municipal election in Arizona right now. Everybody's eligible. It's an open primary in that. So Paul Johnson says it best. I go in a traditional partisan election, I get a walking list. I just knock on one party or the other's doors. Now I got to knock on everybody's doors. I got to listen to everybody. I got to be available to everybody in my district.
So then how do you respond to there is no solution to what happens after the primary? The legislature has to decide. Republicans and Democrats in the legislature don't like this, so they don't. Right. And so they've got to choose the rules.
So keep this in mind. Anything is better than the current system today. Anything is better. Don't let the enemy of perfect or the enemy of good be perfect. Anything is better, because today 80% of those politicians are elected outright in a primary. Under this system, 0 will be elected. So anything is better. So what we say to the legislature is you can pick the top 5 candidates to move forward or as few as 2 to move forward. That's not our call, and it's your call, and the governor and the legislature will have to agree on that. I suspect, knowing that most politicians don't like competition, they're going to choose the top 2. So you'll get races where there's a Republican against a Republican and a Democrat against a Democrat. But they'll be campaigning to everybody. So it changes the dynamic of the election.
As you can see, he has quite an opinion on this. So stay tuned. Let's see how they do it. We'll be back. Critics say it will hurt citizen initiatives and give more power to lawmakers, but proponents say it would give rural voters more representation and protect Arizona from out-of-state interest. It's Prop 134, and Chad Smith with the Arizona Farm Bureau tells us why he believes voters should vote yes this November. This is Before You Vote. All right, welcome back to Before You Vote. Prop 134 deals with signatures, and it seems maybe a little bit confusing, but it isn't. Across the state of Arizona, to get things on the ballot, you've got to get signatures across the state. For some, it's 10%. For others, it's 15%. But you're not required to do it statewide. You can do it all in Maricopa County if you wanted to, which kind of takes the other areas of the state out. Joining us now from the Arizona Farm Bureau is Chad Smith. Chad, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, Mike, appreciate it. Glad to be with you guys today.
So 134, explain why the Farm Bureau is taking this so seriously and why take a position. Why is it important to the Farm Bureau?
You know, we get that question a lot. Why is an ag advocacy organization working so hard on Prop 134? Well, we represent all of Arizona. A lot of our membership is in rural Arizona. And so it's extremely important for us to advocate for those folks in rural Arizona to have a voice, and this is just one common sense way to allow rural Arizonans to have a voice on this citizen-led initiative process.
And, you know, there's a lot of diversity in Maricopa County and across the state, a lot of differences of opinion. And if you can, and it's the easiest way to do it, if you can do this just in Maricopa County, then you only have to focus in one area of the state, get your 10 or 15%. What 134 would mean, you'd have to get 10 or 15% from every legislative district, which means those rural parts of Arizona now have an equal voice.
Yeah, and that's why we're strongly advocating for this. A lot of times, like you said, 60% of voters live in Maricopa County, so signature collectors can never leave Maricopa County, disregarding the rest of the state and rural Arizona. So we want everybody to have a voice.
Yeah, and it would make sense. I mean, I'm not saying it's anything nefarious, but if an organization is trying to get signatures, they're going to do it the quickest and the easiest way. And if you're going to do that, you're going to go to Tucson, you're going to be in Phoenix and these urban areas where it's much easier to be in contact with the public. Yep,
absolutely. And that's why we keep pushing it to say get out to every legislative district. If it's good for Arizona, then everybody should have a say in what goes on the ballot. The challenge is on these ballot initiatives is when they never leave the county. Those initiatives oftentimes impact the entire state.
Right.
And so by the time it gets on the ballot, with 60% of the voters living in Maricopa County, they're the ones that control the outcome of the election and the outcome of the ballot initiative on the ballot. So let's give all Arizonans a say in what goes on the ballot before it ever gets there.
So opponents of this, and I'm sure you've heard this criticism, and I'm interested in how you'll answer it. Opponents are saying this is intended to make it much more difficult for grassroots organizations to get things on the ballot. How do you answer that? How do you respond?
I've heard that argument time and time again, and you know what? It really doesn't. What it does is it makes them have to go out beyond those borders of Maricopa County. So signature collectors are paid, or out-of-state interest groups will pay $1 million for signature collectors to stand in downtown Phoenix to collect signatures. I'm sure this is going to make it a little difficult because they're going to have to go out beyond Maricopa County, but it improves the access to this process.
Well, some are arguing actually that this could be an influence of special interest, that this could help the special interest groups. Now, I don't necessarily see it that way, but how do you answer that argument?
Yeah, I just don't see it. I've heard that argument as well. They tout the idea that if we want special interest groups, they're the only ones that are going to be able to afford it. But at the end of the day, like I said, if it's good for Arizona, it's a simple process. Just go out beyond those borders. 75% of the legislative districts touch Maricopa County. So it's not a huge hurdle.
And see, for me, it seems reasonable in this sense that you're right. If it's going to affect the entire state, if the intent of the signature gathering is you've got to get 10% or 15% of the electorate to say they want it on the ballot, that's all well and good. But you should be able to do that from all corners of the state so that the people in La Paz County are represented like the people of Maricopa County with that same 10 or 15%.
Yep. And they know what's coming on the ballot. A lot of times they have no idea what's on the ballot until they see their ballot in November, right? And so this would force them to go out and help educate voters across rural Arizona.
And it would also make it so that it would be only the very serious people with serious measures because they know they have a bigger job to do. It would then eliminate some of the others, don't you think? We have, I think, 20 in Maricopa County we're going to vote on.
Yep. Yeah, you have to sell it. You got to go out and sell it. Like I said, if it's good for all of Arizona, then it should be pretty simple to get the signatures across the state.
So when it comes to this, how active is the Arizona Farm Bureau in these I know you advocate for agriculture, obviously, but is this something new for you to advocate on behalf of a ballot initiative like this?
We have in the past. Obviously, I've been here just over a year, but prior to my time in Arizona, I know there was what we referred to as the hogwash campaign, which was an out-of-state special interest group, came into the state, and Arizona Farm Bureau, stepped up and put a ton of money into fighting that initiative, and we ultimately won it. So yeah, this isn't unheard of. We will always advocate to give our farmers and ranchers and rural Arizonans a voice in the process.
Well, Chad, I appreciate the time today. This is an important issue, and I thank you for your input.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate you having me.
All right, we'll be back in just a moment. For almost 5% of Arizona voters, their proof of citizenship and thus voting status is being called into question thanks to an internal error by the state. Chuck Coughlin returns to weigh in on the issue and who leaked the governor's private phone call on this matter. This is Before You Vote. All right, we are talking with Chuck Coughlin. This time I want you to put your hat on, working for governors, being on staff. We heard 98,000 voters maybe have been disenfranchised because they got their licenses before 96 and they registered to vote after 2004, and it's about proof of citizenship, and now we hear that number is 218,000. Are you concerned that if we have very close races in Arizona, that the people that lose by a really small margin are going to demand to know of those 218,000 who voted that shouldn't have?
And they should have a right to do that. But you should let them vote. I mean, let them vote. And then if you want to litigate that, then you can go through the record and the recorder and everybody can go back and establish what I would imagine to be 99.9% certainty that most of these people are citizens since
and don't you think they're already doing that? That they have to be going through and looking for, okay, let's start looking at these people now. Like me, I got my license in 1995. Right. So I registered before 2004, so I was grandfathered in.
Right.
But if I fell into that category, it's simple for me.
Right.
I'm a citizen. I was born here.
I have friends on the list. I know people on the list that are like me who are politicos.
But you wouldn't blame a candidate that said, listen, if I lost by 47 votes in a district,
I'd want to know.
I'd want to know.
But the right way to do that is let them vote and then figure it out. Don't disenfranchise people from participating because that's there's no remedy to that.
Right.
So let them vote and then determine the outcome.
On September 10th, there was a phone call, I believe it was the 10th, a phone call between the governor, before all this came out, the governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General on a conference call deciding how they were going to wrap their arms around this. The call was leaked. And in the call, the governor said to the Secretary of State, I think you should pull those voters and let them only vote in federal-only elections. And then both the Secretary of State and Attorney General fought back against it, and they came to an agreement. The bigger issue for me, and I want to know if it is for you, we're having worked for governors, is that this was leaked.
Yeah.
And all three are in the same political party. Yeah. Let's establish that.
Yes. It would demonstrate. If it's true, I have no independent knowledge that the leak is true.
Call is out there.
I'm with you. And so what was said is between those parties and then subsequently reported. This is what I do know. There is tension between the Attorney General and the governor, and there is tension between the Secretary of State and the governor on a whole variety of issues. The Attorney General has had some pointed remarks on water, on stuff that she has failed to engage on that. And the secretary, in turn, has had other pointed disagreements with her on a variety of other things. There's not a lot of love in the room there.
You've worked in administrations. During the Brewer administration, there was a lot of arguments about how the deficit was going to be handled, and it got very contentious.
Yes, it did.
But the idea that you're going to leak something is a different level, isn't it?
Well, right. The leaking of it, which happened in that period of time too, is designed to disempower somebody. It's intended to put somebody in an unfavorable community light, which diminishes public opinion of that person. And in this instance, that intentional leak would make, in my opinion, Hobbs, the governor, look poorly, look like a partisan political official, while the secretary and the Attorney General were standing up for the rule of law. Not going to take anybody's right to vote away.
Yeah.
Right. We can remedy that later, but I'm not going to eliminate their ability to participate.
And let's not forget the fact that before she was the governor, she oversaw elections with Secretary of State.
Yes,
so
she
that
did.
throws another level in. I just wanted to get your take on that because I think the issue's a big one, but the fact that there's that kind of just, fighting going on. So he's the expert. He knows where the bodies are buried in Arizona politics. We'll be back. Thank you all for tuning in this week. We'll see you next Sunday on Before You Vote.